The Flexible Constitution.
My first work was a work in constitutional theory. The book was called The Flexible Constitution. It took to task things that law professors were saying about originalism. I don't know if you know this, but in the law school community, the way that they do their thinking in jurisprudence, it's very adversarial. You have this public, that public, some other public, living constitutionalists, the liberal scholars, the conservative scholars, and they basically produce works that try to validate those faiths. I want to tell you, I'm 100% against this model. What we need to do is have the old school, where we were lovers of truth before we were lovers of anything else. We can't be lovers of outcomes. We've got to be lovers of inquiry. And so, because these law professors were doing this stuff with originalism, I basically felt I had to plow through that because I thought there was a lot of confusions in it, which I think the book showed. And what the ultimate conclusion was in the book was something at first I didn't expect. Basically, I had to say this: if originalism was flawed, then what is the right way to read the Constitution? And the problem is, I myself didn't want to simply say that the other camp was right, because they had problems too. In many ways, what I'm interested in is what Ronald Dworkin was interested in. Ronald Dworkin tried to establish what he thought was the correct way to read the Constitution without first consulting his politics. He wanted to first consult the proper way to go about the analysis. So anyway, in my first book, what came out is a Wittgensteinian constitutional perspective. I basically found a way to take Ronald Dworkin and to wed him to later Wittgenstein. And that's kind of interesting because that had never been done before. A lot of people, including Dworkin himself, really didn't like the influence that Wittgenstein left in philosophy. And that's very careful distinction to make. What Dworkin really didn't like were the Wittgensteinians.
So there is a difference between Wittgenstein and his devotees. Tell me, what makes your view different?
I would consider myself a little bit of a new Wittgensteinian. I hate these terms because it's very difficult. We get controversial as to what they mean. But I definitely believe that what was going on in fourth quarter Wittgenstein, if it's a football game in the fourth quarter, what's going on very late in his life is probably the most important part of Wittgenstein. So I think rather than discounting what's going on there, that really has to be definitive in a proper understanding of what Wittgenstein was all about. So anyway, my first book was on constitutional theory. It tried to deal with the problems of poor philosophical thinking in law schools where they have this adversarial thing going on. And it also tried to then say the right way to interpret a constitution.
So, what would be the key takeaway that a layperson should understand?
The whole premise is that the Constitution gets passed into law, so it's kind of an enacted law. The ayes have it, it gets passed through the assemblies, which were set up lawfully to pass a constitution. And when you pass the document into law, you don't define anything. There's no definition sections in any kind of positive law today, and we pass language into law. Normally what we have are definitions and a lot more rigid nomenclature. We have a lot of text, a lot of legal text. The American Constitution didn't do that. And so the question becomes, how do you interpret a flexible document that is the supreme law of the land? And so basically I had to reach into a Wittgenstein-Dworkin creation in order to be able to try to put that forward.